Greetings, humans, I'm Retrobot, and you are not. Ha ha hee hee ho ho. Here I go.
Oh!
Ouch. Pull me out.
Oh boy, Retrobot. It's closing time. Lights out. I'll pull you out tomorrow.
Hey, wait.
Greetings once again, ladies and gents. This is Retro Ernest of Retro Electrotech. And what I have here on the bench is one half of a split plinth design from a Music Hall MMF 5.1 SE as in Sierra Echo. So I did a video previously on this, probably about a month back, so if for some reason you're interested in that, just scroll in reverse and you will see it. But anyways, I just want to also mention that this is more of a customer update video, okay? But I know that there's others that follow along with these videos, and you're more than welcome to do that. But you know, to some of my brothers from other mothers and sisters from other misters that get all poopy pants over these kind of videos and you know, thumbs down because it doesn't have the type of instructional content that they're looking for, or whatever the case. You know, it's a video, for crying out loud. Just, you know, skedaddle somewhere else and, you know, just go be miserable somewhere else. So anyways, let me move forward. When this came into me, I initially performed a function test and found that there was no output. And the reason why there wasn't any output is because these, and I'm grabbing some cables here, these aftermarket cables that were used with this turntable that incorporate this very stiff wiring here, you know, they figured they would supercharge the turntable and probably supercharge the customer by using these cables, which, you know, is all fine and dandy. But the problem is, and I'm going to zoom in here in just a second. Okay, this little rubber plug that you see filling in the gap here, or the hole on the bottom of this turntable, or excuse me, tonearm base, had some little stranded wires coming out of it, and on the bottom side, or underneath there, was a connection point where the tonearm wires connected up to. And then of course, again, you had those leads coming out, some stranded leads that connected up with the cables that I pointed out. So the problem is that some very inadequate strain relief was used in this area here. Now, this is not the original setup, obviously, and I'm not talking about what I did here. I'm talking about just generally speaking. That's not the way this was set up originally, and I'm going to point that out in just a moment. So they used a cheap little plastic clamp in this position here to hold in place their super duper cables. So that broke loose, and then you know, they soldered directly onto those little you know, thin stranded leads, and the solder joints weren't good, and when the strain relief gave away, then everything went to pot. So as far as the connections go, and things were pulled out and all that, so that's why there wasn't any output. So what I did to improve the situation was, well, first of all, I had to pull a new tonearm wire through the tonearm, because the other tonearm wire was way too short to begin with. So as you can see, I utilized a terminal strip here and made some bomb-proof connections from the new cables here to the tonearm wire, and everything is nice and secure. This is a metal clamp. Underneath the clamp here, there's a stack of rubber grommets, and I glued the grommets together and to the wire, so there's no chance of this wire pulling out or slipping. And of course, the pressure of the clamp on top of the grommets, you know, provides a really bomb-proof strain relief, you know, setup here, and, you know, bomb-proof connections here, and everything is looking good. So let me also zoom back out and talk about something else that was going on that I kind of improved upon a bit, and bear with me just a moment here. Okay, so I'm going to bring into frame the other half of that split plinth, and I'm going to show you what these hacks did so that they can make their little modification work. So they ended up carving out this section of the plinth here so that they could, you know, get their cables in there and all that stuff. And you know, these guys did a lot of bad work. So what I did was just kind of, you know, flatten things out a bit, and, you know, just kind of even things out, flatten it out, because I said to myself, well, I'm going to use what they already started, because I'm not going to go back to the original configuration, and I'll explain that in just a minute here. But I didn't originally do this. You can see the way they just, it looks like a beaver was in here, you know, chewing this up and carving this out. So again, I just flattened everything out in here because I wanted to utilize this space that they already started. And the reason why I wanted to do that was because based on the setup that I decided to go with here, I needed that space, because remember, this is a split plinth, so the plinth is going to, you know, be sandwiched here, obviously. So as you can see, and let me just set it down here. There you go. And let me just kind of slide the camera over just a bit here. So I just decided that, yeah, I wanted to channel out that space a little bit better. And even though it was a hack job that they started, I improved upon it and made things right. And originally there was a big or fairly big plastic box that covered this whole area here that housed a couple of female RCA connectors, and all the connections were made, of course, under the box there. So I had a little scrap piece of sheet metal in the shop, that just a little tiny piece, and I just bent it and hit it with some black spray paint, and just you know, channeled out a little half moon hole, and adhered a grommet in there, and you know, just to make it look better, so that the back of this section here wasn't just open, you know, and didn't look all hacked up. So you know, it's better than it was. You know, that's what I had to work with, and so that's what I did. So now what I'm going to do is go ahead and get the unit flipped over and start getting into some quick testing, and then go into the setup, you know, setting the tracking force and the zenith, or, you know, the yaw axis of the cartridge, and just get everything lined up, and then it'll be good to go. Okay, so here we are on the top side, of course, and before I get into performing a basic setup meaning I'm just going to set the tracking force, or the, you know, the downward pressure or downward weight of the stylus as it rides in the groove of the vinyl. So in doing that, I'm going to be utilizing the tonearm weight back here and adjusting that accordingly to get the right weight in grams, you know, that I just mentioned in terms of you know, tracking force or downward weight or force. Okay, so I'm utilizing this basic little digital scale here, and I'll get into that more in just a moment. Now, along the lines of that basic setup, other than tracking force, I'm going to be looking at the zenith, or the, you know, the yaw axis of the you know, cartridge here. Okay, so I'm going to be using a protractor to establish whether or not my cartridge is in alignment in regard to the zenith or the yaw axis, and I'll show you how that's done. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail. I'm mainly doing this for the customer so he understands where I'm setting the tracking force of his cartridge, his stylus, and to show that his you know, cartridge is in, you know, alignment as far as the yaw axis is concerned. Now, if I needed to perform other adjustments, such as you know, if I was getting into, you know, the rake angle, or the you know, the roll axis, or, you know, azimuth, of the cartridge, that would require a bit more tedious adjustment, and on this tone arm I would have to utilize shims between the cartridge and the head shell. It would have to be shimmed just so, and that's very tedious, and those adjustments are very slight. So I think this tone arm is probably okay the way it sits. So again, I'm not going to get into that. So what I'm going to start by mentioning is that when you're performing these adjustments, you do want to have your turntable leveled off, and you should have your turntable leveled off anyways, just for normal everyday operation when you're playing vinyl. So no mystery there. You're either starting off with a bench or a table that's leveled off, or if not, you can sometimes adjust the feet of the turntable. Some feet are adjustable on some turntables to kind of get the level of the turntable where you want it. But if not, no rocket science. You can use some thin pieces of cardboard, some shims, or or playing cards work well for that too. So you can kind of fine-tune the adjustments there and get it where you want it. And as far as levels go, I'm not going to get into a discussion about that because there's fancy schmancy turntable levels, and I have nothing against those. I own some, but most of the time I find myself reaching for just a regular old level and checking the level of the turntable on 2 planes. I'm not going to lower the tripod down to observe the bubble, but I can assure you it's dead center. It's right where it needs to be. And then you're going to want to check the level on this other plane here. Okay, and let me just kind of peek my head around, and yeah, it's leveled off nicely. So again, this turntable does have a little bubble level built into it, and if I look straight overhead, yeah, the bubble's within the circle there, so that's good. And I also, and I do have, these turntable levels and all that. And if I drop it down on the platter, yeah, it's right in the circle on the money. So everything's nice and leveled off. And the other thing I want to mention that you'll want to do is make sure that your platter is stabilized, that it's not going to rotate around. And some people will tape their, platters to the to the plinth, just kind of tape it off, and so it doesn't move. That's fine, but just be careful as to what tape you use there. Sometimes you could use a little piece of Scotch tape. Just don't press it on too hard, or painter's tape, something that doesn't stick real hard and heavy, that comes off easy, because you don't want to be dealing with some really sticky adhesive on a nice plinth, especially if you're working on a customer's piece of equipment. You don't want to be messing up the surface of their plinth. So what I use a lot of times is this just clean white craft putty, and I don't stick it on there real hard. I just kind of fold it over, almost like L-shaped, like you see here, and just kind of press it in with my thumb lightly, just enough to adhere to the side of the platter here and to the base of the plinth here, or the top of the plinth, and it keeps it from spinning around. Okay, so that's good enough, and it comes right off, and it doesn't leave residue and sticky crap all over the surface. So there you go. So I'm going to get started, and I've kind of tweaked around with the weight on the back already just a little bit, but I'm going to get a little bit more into that. So as you can see with this particular tone arm weight, it doesn't have any sort of numeric indicators or anything like that. It doesn't have a dial, a numeric dial, like some tone arm weights have. And the purpose of those, let me just kind of back out once again so I can just get a better look at the tone arm. If we were going to zero out or null out the tone arm, you'd have to have your cueing lever deactivated, and you'd have to be very careful not to drop your cartridge down on the on the plinth and damage your needle. But anyways, you'd rotate your tone arm weight rearward just to the point where you float your tone arm, where it's just floating on its own, And when it's at the point where it's floating nice and level with the plinth, nice and level with the surface of the plinth here, then that's when the tone arm is nulled out or zeroed out. And then you would support your tone arm just carefully and then turn that dial to 0, just to indicate that you're zeroed out. And then after setting the dial, then you would turn the entire weight, and that dial would move along with it, and then that's when you would dial in the amount of weight you want in grams. Okay, in this case I want 1.7 grams. But anyways, that being said though, let me go ahead and just swing this over. I'm kind of in the ballpark, I think, right now, because I was tweaking with the weight a little bit before I started this video, but I just wanted to kind of show you guys, and especially the customer, where I'm setting his tracking force. And let me just kind of drop down on a knee here and make sure that needle stylus is going to drop down on that center mark of the scale. Let me just get it all lined up before I even turn on the scale there. Let me get it on target, and I think that looks pretty good right here. So, all right, and I already made sure that this little scale was in calibration. They come with a little 5 gram weight that you just set down on the scale, and if it reads 5 grams, well, you're calibrated, and it did. It was right on the money. These little scales are pretty good. They do all right. Okay, so let's go ahead and set down the tone arm on that scale there and see what we got. Yeah, so you know what? I want 1.7. We're at 1.77, 1.78, right about there. You know what? I could live with that. I'm just going to leave it as is. So there you go. And let me get this out of the way here and get that tone arm latch engaged and get this out of here. So what I'm going to do now is, again, check the zenith, or again the yaw axis, and make sure the cartridge is okay in that regard. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so here we go. Let me get zoomed in a little bit better on this protractor. So again, I'm not going to get into a lot of detail with this setup. Anyways, you'll notice these 2 dots, one here and one over here. These are our null points. Okay. All right. And we want to set the tip of our stylus down on these null points. And I'm going to do that now, and then I'm going to go ahead and try to get this camera overhead so I can show you what it is that I'm looking at. So let me go ahead and do that. Okay, this is going to be a little tough because I'm hand holding the camera, and I'm zoomed in the best that I could be zoomed in. So what we're looking at here is we're concerned with the front of the cartridge here, okay? Right here. And what we're looking at, and I think I bumped it just a little bit, but I can see that the cartridge, the yaw angle of this cartridge is a little bit off. There's a little bit more of a gap here. The front of this cartridge should be running perfectly parallel with these lines, okay? All right, these horizontal lines. And it should be perfectly parallel. I have a little bit more of a gap on this side of the cartridge than I do on this side, okay? So that's what I'm going to correct by adjusting these screws just slightly. You don't want to loosen them up too much so that the cartridge is all loose. Just enough so you can manipulate it carefully, with just a little manipulation, and I can kind of bring this half of the cartridge into alignment here. So that's what I'm going to do off camera. So I just wanted to show you so you get the gist of what I'm shooting for. So that's the mission. Okay, so I'm going to try to hold this steady. I'm back and had to fiddle with the adjustment a little bit, and so the front of that cartridge is running nice and parallel now with the horizontal line directly in front of it, and same thing at the other null point over there. I'm not going to move it in place because I'm hand holding this and I don't want to deal with that right now, but that's essentially what you want to do, and I will briefly explain why that is. So in short, the reason why we're doing this type of an adjustment and using these two null points on this protractor is to kind of compensate for a little bit of error that is introduced because of the way these types of turntables and tone arms track across a piece of vinyl. Unlike a linear tracking turntable, which tracks straight across the the grooves, there's a slight arc to these tone arms when they travel across the vinyl, and if these null points aren't factored in, and the yaw or zenith of the cartridge slash stylus aren't taken into consideration and brought as close to perfection, if you will, as possible in regard to those null points, then the sound quality or fidelity is not going to be as optimal as it could be. So again, I mentioned too that those other adjustments, at least with this type of a tone arm setup, would require some shimming, and that would be quite finicky. But at the very least, I wanted to assure that the yaw of the cartridge was in alignment to help compensate for the errors that I mentioned that will be introduced because of the way in which the tone arm tracks across the groove with a slight arc. And these null points here are the two positions that the stylus is riding in the groove as straight as it's going to ride in the groove. So it's nice and parallel at that point, nice and straight in the groove at these 2 points. These are the two optimal positions, so that's why we want to adjust at those points. So that's kind of where I'm getting at. And I'm not going to talk about the effective arm length and overhang and all that. As a matter of fact, this isn't even the original tone arm for this turntable. But anyways, regardless of that, though, I'm not going to get into that. You could look into that, but there's gauges for that as well to measure your overhang, or that's part of that effective tone arm length and what have you. So now I'm going to go into a quick audio test.
Right on.
Rock steady. Ooh, this groove is right. Man, don't make no moves in this right, because you can't dance no way. Who's talking to you? Talking about rock hard this. Hey, man, get that right now. I bet you I can outdance you, man.
This is a poor man's shoe production.